Several people out there, they talk about how the Beatles are just a bunch of overrated, no talent guys. Most of the time, the people that are saying that, they don't have any music background.
I've noticed that too, actually. A lot of them have never picked up an instrument, yet they feel like they have something to say in this. They never really studied music.
It's hard to be, like, oh, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. You've never played music, you've never written a song, you've never performed live, so how the hell could you say if the Beatles were good or not, right?
Yeah.
Everybody has their taste.
Especially interesting within like the younger generation, because they obviously grew up with what is auto-tune and everything aligned and all this stuff. And
Yeah.
back then, and it's hard to explain that to them because back then you actually had to perform all that. All those harmonies that they did in the studio,
Yeah.
that's all real. Whereas
Yeah.
nowadays, you could just auto-tune all that. Click of a button,
Yeah.
click of a mouse.
I mean, you can fix some things back then, but not nearly to the point
Oh,
of
no.
what we do now. I mean, you can speed up things like Strawberry Fields Forever. They sped it up to match 3 different takes together, but still they were 3 different takes. They weren't edited in the sense of auto-tune or anything like that, right?
Yeah.
When we talked about wanted to discuss this particular item, I went out on the web and was looking around for some things, some quotes from people. The first comment we made was about people that don't know anything about music. I found a quote, Quincy Jones. You know who Quincy Jones is?
I know what Quincy Jones is.
Yeah. So he did an interview a few years ago, just this little snippet. What do you think when you first heard rock music? And this is Quincy. Rock ain't nothing but a white version of rhythm and blues, motherfucker. I met Paul McCartney when he was 21. I don't know where he was going with that. But then the next question was, what were your first impressions of the Beatles? To Quincy, he said that they were the worst musicians in the world. They were no-playing motherfuckers. Paul was the worst bass player I ever heard. And Ringo, don't even talk about it. I remember once we were in the studio with George Martin and Ringo. Had taken 3 hours for a 4-bar thing he was trying to fix on a song. He couldn't get it. We said, mate, why don't you get some lager and lime, some shepherd's pie, and take an hour and a half and relax a little bit? So he did, and we called Ronnie Verrell, a jazz drummer. Ronnie came in for 15 minutes and tore it up. Ringo comes back and says, George, can you play it back for me one more time? So George did, and Ringo says, that didn't sound so bad. And I said, yeah, motherfucker, because it ain't you. Great guy, though. What do you think of that?
Pretty harsh right there. I mean, it's almost like what I've said about Elvis in a way. I never, because they say he's like the creator or whatever of rock and roll. But I mean, there were people before him.
Yeah, he did a lot of covers.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I compared like Vanilla Ice to that in a way as well. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That really struck me because it's like, all right, Quincy Jones, this guy is a very accomplished musician. He knows what he's talking about,
Yeah.
right?
He wrote a lot of classic hit albums.
So on the adverse side of that, so he brings in a jazz drummer to a rock session. Most jazz drummers are much more technically sound than your average rock drummer. It doesn't surprise me that a jazz drummer can come in there and do a rock drum part in about 15 minutes because it's common time. It's probably going to be a 4/4, no sporadic time changes. You're just keeping, especially with a Ringo track, you're keeping the backbeat. So that doesn't really surprise me. And I mean, Ringo knew he wasn't the best drummer.
Yeah.
I don't think he ever pretended that he was. At least not anything that I've ever seen or heard.
I don't know, but Quincy Jones, he comes from a world of more like Motown and that sort of thing. So, it's a completely different style of music than something like the Beatles were doing in general,
Yeah, more technically sound.
Yeah.
Now him with Paul, that struck me as odd. 'Cause I always felt that Paul was the best musician of the group because he could play bass, play guitar, left-handed and right-handed. He could sing. He could play drums. He could play piano.
He was just talking about his bass playing, though, wasn't he?
Yeah, but even if you listen on the Beatles bass tracks, how melodic is his bass guitar? I mean, it's extremely melodic stuff that he's doing. He's not just keeping your basic,
playing the root note of what the guitar players are doing.
He's not keeping the root note. Usually he's playing all around the note. You got to know scales to do that stuff. So it's not the most challenging thing in the world. But then again, obviously he was pretty good. And then to be able to play bass and sing at the same time, I think is also a bit of an accomplishment there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think your comment is perfect. Quincy comes from a completely different musical environment. The jazz musicians, they're on a whole different level than your standard rock guys.
Yeah. But like you said, it was like it could have been like a typical 4/4 beat, which it most likely was.
Yeah.
You know, for a jazz musician, you probably just flew right through that.
Yeah. You just keep your common time and do your fills where you're supposed to do your fills.
Yeah. Know your 2s and your 4s and you.
I don't know. I don't know what Quincy's angle there was, but I don't buy it. So, Quincy Jones, you were there, but with all due respect, I think you're wrong. I got some more here. So these are just from your common music critics, but the interesting spin of this is they're from 1964. This is the LA Times. With their bizarre shrubbery, the Beatles are obviously a press agent's dream combo. Not even their mothers would claim that they sing well. But the hirsute thickets they affect make them rememberable. And they project a certain kittenish charm which drives the immature, shall we say, ape. Especially that line, not even their mothers would claim that they sing well. What do you think of that?
How do you respond to that?
I think that's a bunch of crap. I mean, well, this was in 1964, so the amount of work they had accomplished at that time was not up to par to the latter part of their career, in my opinion. You know, some tracks like This Boy with the 3-part harmony, I think that proves that they were a very talented vocal group. I think what the common audience doesn't realize. So the Beatles were formed in the late 50s, right? Mm-hmm. And with John, who met Paul, they brought in George, and then Ringo later. They weren't put together by a corporate entity.
Yeah.
They just were 4 guys from Liverpool that happened to play music and came together, right?
That reviewer almost makes it seem like it was, like you said, like a corporation, you know, like they're like a boy band almost.
Yeah. So
I mean, in a way, they kind of became one with their popularity, but at the same time, they weren't formed like from an advertisement.
No, they didn't deliberately have a casting call.
Yeah.
And find individuals that had their own personalities, but also had their own personal style. But well, I guess that's the same thing there, but they could harmonize, right?
Yeah.
The boy bands can harmonize. That's what the Beatles could do. Mm-hmm. But they weren't put together like that. It just happened. Right?
Yeah.
And there's some tracks that I listen to that, especially in some outtakes, where I can't tell if it's George or Paul singing.
I've had the same thing happen.
And I'm like, is that George or Paul? I think one of the tracks is Not Guilty. Not Guilty. There's some, that's a George song, but some parts of it sound exactly like Paul McCartney. It's really strange. So anyways, back to the original comment. The fact that they could harmonize and their voices work so well together, it's really just a stroke of luck. Like the universe just wanting something to happen like that.
Yeah, they say all the stars aligned.
Literally.
Being at the right place at the right time.
This is Newsweek from 1964. Visually, they are a nightmare. Tight, dandified Edwardian beatnik suits and great pudding bowls of hair. Musically, they are a near disaster. Guitars and drums slamming out a merciless beat that does away with secondary rhythms, harmony, and melody. Their lyrics, punctuated by nutty shouts of yeah, 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 are a catastrophe, a preposterous farrago of Valentine card romantic sentiments.
I often wonder what these people think later on when the Beatles progressed, you know, with like Revolver, even something like you could see like the groundwork being laid with something like Rubber Soul. Even I could see like what was to come after that a little bit, just a little inkling, you know.
Yeah, I mean, in '64, that's when Hard Day's Night, all that was really going on,
Hmm.
and think about a Hard Day's Night and Rubber Soul. Now, maybe the jump from those two albums wasn't too significant,
Hmm.
but Rubber Soul to Revolver, like you
Yeah,
said, I
that's
mean,
what I'm saying. You could sense what was to come.
yeah,
You know, it's like the groundwork had pretty much been laid. You know, you could tell that they're trying to branch out little by little, and then Revolver came, and it just continued progressing and progressing and getting better and better, and becoming almost
yeah.
an entirely different band.
So I have this fantastic book called The Complete Beatles Chronicle by Mark Lewison, who he chronicles everything the Beatles did every day of their career. Revolver was '66.
That's actually the album that got me into the Beatles. I remember that.
That's a great album.
It really
Very
is.
well eclectic, all over the place.
I remember the first time I heard Taxman. It kind of interested me. I liked the chorus. The harmonies on the chorus kind of got me. Even though they're kind of minute, I thought they still sounded really cool.
If I got my date right, it looks like about June 1966. All right. So they finished Revolver in June 1966. So Revolver in June 1966, Sgt. Pepper after that. Guess when they started recording Sgt. Pepper?
Pretty much immediately afterward, wasn't it?
November of 1966. Now, if none of you have ever heard Revolver or Sgt. Pepper, I mean, just listen to them. You'll hear the difference between those two albums. Yes, they're the Beatles and they have their own kind of sound, but the jump from Revolver to Sgt. Pepper is like, I don't know,
Stylistically, it's a complete elevation. I mean,
complete. Your average musician, and let me just put it into the context of some other bands that I'm a huge fan of. So Radiohead, they were recording OK Computer, I believe, in 1996 to 1997, and that it came out in '97. And they were touring in '97, '98. I believe they went back into the studio late '98, '99, somewhere, definitely '99, and into 2000, and that's when Kid A came out in 2000. So from the '97 release of OK Computer to the 2000 release of Kid A, how different are those two albums, OK Computer and Kid A?
even stylistically, but you can kind of see where the groundwork was being laid at with those as well. But
Yeah.
you know, it's also stylistically a jump.
OK Computer is a complete rock-driven album, guitars, all that stuff. Kid A is more electronica, right?
Mm-hmm.
It took about, if you look at the release of the albums, 97 and 2000, that's 3 years' time. And they were touring and all that stuff. Now, let's go back in time to the Beatles. June of '66, they released Revolver. They're also performing. They're also doing their obligations. November of '66, they go back into the studio to start Sgt. Pepper. I mean, what is that? July, August, September, October, November. 5 freaking months. And they're back in the studio working on Sgt. Pepper. I mean, that's just mind-blowing. I don't know how they did it. I really don't. Because like you were saying, the stylistic jump, the style is quite an elevation from the last album.
Yeah, it's like every album was trying to top itself in a way, to a point.
Really? And they were the top band in the world at the time, right?
Yeah.
They finish Sgt. Pepper. Do you recall what comes after Sgt. Pepper?
Magical Mystery Tour.
Magical Mystery Tour. All right, so they finished Sgt. Pepper in April of 1967. So November to April of '67. November of '66 to April of '67, they were in the studio. According to my notes here, a mere 5 days later, they start working on Magical Mystery Tour. 5 freaking days later, they're on to the next album. By that time, they were not a touring band anymore, so
Yeah.
they didn't have those kinds of obligations. But they raised the stakes for themselves personally by trying to do a made-for-TV movie, Magical Mystery Tour. So also trying to make an album and a movie. somewhat simultaneously, but I just can't believe that, man. 5 days after making one of the greatest albums of all time, according to a lot of lists out there, not just Josh's opinion here, they go into the studio to start working on Magic Mystery Tour.
It's kind of no wonder at times, they broke up the way that they did. I mean, if you're around each other that much, they say it becomes like your second wife in a way, the band members or the band itself.
So, yeah, from 62 to 70, they're constantly working. I mean,
I can imagine the pressure that they're putting themselves under.
It's all in here, folks. It's amazing to me. I mean, Magic Mystery Tour, what songs are on that album?
Strawberry Fields Forever.
Strawberry Fields Forever. All right, what else?
Your Mother Should Know.
Your Mother Should Know. There's also I Am the Walrus.
Yeah.
Full on the Hill. All You Need Is Love. Speaking of which, All You Need Is Love. That's the first ever satellite broadcasts. And Lennon wrote the song just for that session. They performed it live. I mean, the list goes on and on.
What's interesting about that, a little side note, I know it has something to do with the song, but I think it's funny, like if you were to listen to the track, they both, John and Paul started ad-libbing, "She loves you, yeah. At the end, they were both ad-libbing that. That's just a little side note. I thought it was kind of interesting.
Yeah, just having fun.
Yeah.
That's what I liked about them too. Like if you listen really closely on a lot of their sessions, you can hear them sometimes laughing or saying some things in studio released albums because, I mean, they made serious music, but they didn't take themselves too seriously.
Yeah, like only a Northern song,
Yeah. So there's just one more point I'd like to make about why I think the Beatles are very deserving of the credit that they get. Come and Get It is a song composed by Paul McCartney for the 1969 film The Magic Christian. The song was performed by Badfinger, produced by McCartney, and issued as a single the 5th of December 1969 in the UK and the 12th of January 1970 in the US. It was the band's first release under the Badfinger name and was their international breakthrough, hitting the top 10 in both the UK and US singles charts. A little bit of background for you there.
I told somebody about that, actually. Really? They had to look that up themselves.
Yeah.
They didn't believe me.
It's amazing, right?
Yeah.
So, July 24th, 1969. Studio 2, EMI Studios, London. If a composer planned on giving a song exclusively to someone else, it was customary for him or her to provide the artist with a demo, usually roughly recorded with either an acoustic guitar or piano. In the case of Lennon and McCartney, demos tended to be recorded privately with acetate discs, usually cut by music publisher Dick James. Paul planned on giving the new song Come and Get It to Apple group the Ivies, which would later be called the Badfinger. So he taped the demo at EMI between 2:30 and 3:30 the afternoon of July 24th. Before a Beatles session, John was in the control room and Paul did the recording alone, first singing and playing piano and then overdubbing a double-track vocal with maracas, then drums, then bass. The song was mixed into a stereo. A copy of the mix was made for Paul to give to Badfinger, and the job was done all in 1 hour. Paul also produced the Ivies' virtual note-for-note copy of the demo, taped on EMI on the 2nd of August. He encouraged the group to change their name. They became Badfinger, and Come and Get It became their main theme for the Magic Christian. Yada yada yada. All right, and so that's while the Beatles were working on Abbey Road, and like I said, so Paul McCartney came in before a Beatles session, did a recording of Come and Get It in about an hour, which would go on to be Badfinger's international breakthrough and hitting the top 10 in both UK and US single charts.
Didn't he tell them like something along the lines of like, don't change anything on here or whatever?
Yeah, since he produced it, he's like, this is recorded like this. And that's what they did. Now, I know a lot of other artists have written for other artists.
Yeah.
You know, Neil Diamond wrote for a lot of artists. The guy from One Republic, he's written for a lot of other artists. One of a newer guy. And the list goes on and on and on, but I don't know. I've never heard of anybody do anything like that. Well, Ricky, do you have any last words for our viewing audience in regards to the Beatles and why they're deserving of all of that fame?
I think they were very innovative. You know, for what they had done at the time, you really didn't have a lot of that stuff going on, and for what they had done musically, as far as recording is concerned, just the creativity that it was almost like three really brilliant songwriters. You know, that I'm saying that doesn't happen very often.
No,
Something like that at all.
guys that could be writers of their own group
It started out with two, you know,
in
and
one
George
group.
ended up coming into his own later on, you know.
Yeah.
But I mean, he wrote songs earlier, but later on in their career, he got better and then he did his own solo thing. But I don't know. I think they were very innovative.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you guys for watching. If you have any different opinions about why the Beatles are not overrated or why they are overrated, feel free to talk about it in the comments below.
Looking forward to your comments.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes